attribution low-hanging fruit actually exists. You don't have to be a data scientist to come up with attribution modeling for out-of-home. You actually just have to be smart around how you're connecting what measurement pieces there are and what attribution pieces there are, and how can that link come together. So I've just had my own personal little aha moment there.
It marks a year since we launched Beyond the Billboard podcast, and we couldn't have been more proud of the platform that we've created. We firmly believe we've been delivering on our values to educate, to inform, and to inspire. And we've had such amazing guests from an array of the industry, from clients to agencies to even creative. And we're so grateful to each and every guest that has been with us over this last year. And we're even more grateful to all of our listeners. Thank you for being with us on this journey, and we hope that you continue to be with us and continue to enjoy our content. In our inaugural episode, we had Celia Collins, the powerhouse in the media and advertising industry, join us as we launched the podcast. It seems only fitting to mark our 1-year anniversary and the launch of video to have Celia Collins join us back on the podcast as an esteemed guest. Yes, you heard us correctly. We have launched video. If you're listening to us through any of the audio streaming platforms, please go and search us on YouTube for our Beyond the Billboard YouTube channel and subscribe to stay up to date on all our exciting new content. Celia, thank you so much for this endless amount of support that you have provided to us since we launched the podcast. And thank you so much for joining us again. Thank you.
I'm absolutely honored to be back on your show again. I've bumped into a lot of people since the first podcast, and we have numerous conversations about the triangle, the different ways we look at partnership on out of home. And I'm really intrigued and happy to see where you've gone and how you're continuing the conversation. It's brilliant. Well done.
Let's look at out of home in 2024 and the landscape, the good and the bad. A big job to be done in 2025 is increasing that collaboration amongst all those key parties in the industry, but also collaboration within the out-of-home sector in itself. I think for me, that is a key focus globally and regionally and locally. And then I think the second piece for me, that looking back in 2024 and where we need to focus a lot of attention, is in the measurement piece and out-of-home. I think it's something we're definitely going to touch on as we move forward in this conversation today. I know it's a key element that I'm really excited to hear, Celia, your feedback on. And then I think for me, over 2024, I think a lot more people are taking, or the industry is taking, out of home a lot more seriously. And what I mean by that is it's not just putting a billboard on a schedule and ticking a box anymore. It's about being strategic about the out of home. It's about, and it could be driven by the fragmentation and the number of the media owners and the clutter that's really pushing people to be a lot more strategic, and clients holding partners and agencies a lot more beholden to results. I think that's all driving that, but it's quite exciting to see that people are not just, putting the billboard on the schedule and saying that's my out of home approach, but really getting strategic about that. And then I think something else for me, and as a consistent thing across the globe, is the continued digital out of home boom. We've seen that continue here in South Africa and across Africa with the development and the increased number of screens, and particularly new environments. So, digital out of home in gyms or in paddle courts. I think that's something that really stood out for me. I think some clients, not all, have started to get very smart and fun and clever about the creative that they're putting on out of home. It's really cool to see. We've seen Pineapple and Naked particularly push that envelope in that space in 2024. And then programmatic digital out of home, although data verification for impression multiplying is still something that needs to be resolved, I think there has been a push on that across the continent. So those would be like my key, when I was thinking about this episode, what would be the key things that really stood out for me? Oh, and I think the other one would be media owners are being held more accountable. I think that they are really needing to differentiate themselves. And I think whether that's in how they, model their offering, what data and research they bring to the table, how they revert strategically, how they report. And I think they're really being held accountable to delivering quality and accuracy. And I think that's a great move forward for out-of-home industry in South Africa. So those would be my top ones that I would bring out for this conversation. And Celia, I'd love to ask you, maybe you want to unpack one of those that I've said. Maybe there's something else that I haven't said that you want to raise. But what would you say, looking back in 2024, was, the key areas that stood out for you in out of home in South Africa and perhaps across Africa, and the good and the bad, and maybe what jobs need to be done for 2025.
Thanks, Chris. A lot of content there. I mean, you took me in so many different angles. I could talk for an hour and a half there, just unpacking that. But I think you nailed it on its head. I think the fact that we're back on schedule as out of home in a big way is fantastic. What is happening and what I'm seeing from a client perspective is it's becoming more measurable. And I don't mean an out-of-home measurement. I'm meaning what is driving sales. Ultimately, clients want to know which platforms are driving sales, whether it's a short-term sale or a long-term sale. So we talk about what does out-of-home impactful static do for your brand, and how does it really creates longevity within a brand. So what we talk about brand love, we talk about brand and how that filters into the purchase decision. So it's more about measurement on what actually happens from a client sales perspective. I was just in a conference in Dubai, and most of the focus was on how do we look at short term? How do we look at long term? And what is the ROAS for that client? And what is measurement? So typically we look at static as only a brand measurement, and we look at digital as a short term, where I don't believe that. I think they're interlinked. And we need to make sure, and this is where the creative agency comes in, the messaging is right. Digital is no different. It is in certain terms no different to static. It can still do that brand job that you actually need. It doesn't only have to be a price-driven, short-term, go into store. It can be that long element and that long-term driving sales. So really looking at how do we bring impact into digital. I saw some absolutely phenomenal case studies in Dubai on interlinking phone, interlinking into store from out of home, and what that actually does and how that drives the long-term sale. So great, we're on schedule. I think we need to take the next step for our clients to be actually measurable on what our investment is. And we can do it on out of home. We talk about out of home trying to take some of digital budget on digital screens. I think it's a lot more. The way in which we go out there from a media owner's perspective is to say, how can I help you, Mr. Client, on your ROAS, on bringing in sales for you? And that's the ultimate measurement. So that's the good that I believe is happening and where we actually going to. I think the bad is still we're using third parties in digital out of home, and not all platforms are like this, but the tech costs are munching a lot of the actual cost on screen time. So we look at programmatic and we look at the proportion as to what's going on screen as to the cost. And an exercise which I ran last year really showed me when we're going through a third-party platform and not directly to the media owners, we're losing out on a lot of those tech costs. What do those tech costs do? They play a pivotal role in how we measure and what we measure, but are we measuring the right elements? Are we doing the right A/B testing and the right studies to ensure that tech is actually adding value? It's not just a matter of being able to place at a certain time and ensuring that we've got the traffic during that count. It's about how much of an impact am I having at that time to those audiences. So absolutely more good than bad in out of home. Some of the other platforms have had a lot going on their platforms and how they're having to pivot to go forward. But I really think out of home has taken the step and taken the time to advance themselves.
Seals, thanks for sharing that. And it's also great that we're getting you off the back end of your trip to Dubai that you've just come back from. And it's lovely to get some learnings from such a recent trip and also to a global market to see how can we integrate some of those changes locally. You've touched on ROAS, which is return on advertising spend, for anyone who's not aware of the term. And in my experience, there's often this want to build a strategic focus in out-of-home where you've got out-of-home close to a point of purchase, and then you want to have an uptick in sales in that particular store. And usually the strategic line is there to place the out-of-home inventory as close to the point of purchase. But very often the clients do not want to expose their sales data or share their sales data back with the agency or with the media owner to show that there was an uplift. So I think it's a critical point. And I know in kind of the engagements I've had in that space, it's hugely frustrating to have built a strategy that would show you the proof. And then at times, there are also confidentiality clauses on the client side that they can't really open up themselves completely. But I would love to get your advice or how you've seen, teams work around that. We don't need to know the ins and outs of the profit the client made on the product. But if we could just get that loop right, I think it would also help to steer some of the conversation around out-of-home less transactional and less caught up in, okay, yes, there's measurement in out-of-home, but the measurement is done before the campaign happens. So it proves we plan to reach 1 million people, but closing that loop on the other side, there's such a blockage at times. And I'd love to get your opinion on that.
I do believe in some terms we put our blinkers on in South Africa. If I look at the case studies that I saw in Dubai, yes, it wasn't absolute sales, but there are ways around it as to percentages of driving those sales. So talking around uplift of 20 to 30% of sales actually came from out of home. So, and it's, I talk about short and long term. When you place an out of home close to store, yes, that's short term. What is the long term effect? Is that customer coming back? Have we driven that loyalty for them to come another 20 Ks to a different store whilst they're going and visiting a friend? We close ourselves into a smaller area when we should be looking at a bigger picture to say, look at the long term. Were we able with that board right by the store to actually drive the loyalty for a second portion or a second purchase? Did we get that uplift in the ROAS to be able to say, actually, we can widen the reach? Because we know we've built through longevity and constantly putting our message out there to the consumer that we've driven part loyalty, which drives that secondary sale. It's not only about one sale. And I think sometimes media owners come in and say, well, my board is so close to the point of purchase, you've got to take it. Absolutely not. It doesn't only, that is short term. Great for short-term sales, but what about long-term sales, which I think we underestimate the impact on what it has.
Nalissa Media, your brand, their eyes, amplified with our out-of-home solutions. Get your brand to the people with Nalissa Media's dynamic out-of-home media solutions, tailored to fit your unique campaign needs. Whether you want to engage audiences on billboards, transit ads, or digital screens, we have the right platform for you. Elevate your brand visibility and impact with our innovative and cost-effective solutions.
It leads me to think about a topic called attribution modeling. And when we had the conversation with Tom Goddard, and he spoke about globally how there's a focus on that. And that's obviously also why this was coming up in your travels in Dubai, was about out-of-home's attribution to sales and how that is being modeled. And I know he said, Tom Goddard said to us in our previous episode that it is a focus area globally, not just from a regional Africa and a South Africa perspective. Everybody is trying to get the right model and get this done the right way to really showcase how out-of-home is making a difference and delivering in value. So yes, I think it's two-part, right? And maybe we're not even there yet properly on the brand building piece, but it is two-part. It's one in like your immediate sales or your proximity strategy or your immediate impact to sales or attribution to sales. Then there's also like the brand building and the brand equity and building the brand salience. And how does that in a long term, like you said now, Celia, building brand loyalty, how does that in the long term impact the sales? Because that does play a big role in out of home. One of out of home's biggest roles that everybody will utilize out of home for is that reach and that brand equity and that brand fame and that impact. So, for me, it's like getting the attribution modeling right. And once we're able to do that, we'll be able to really showcase clients the value that out of home can bring. And I think that is a job to be done. And I know that's what this episode's about. It is the job to be done as we move forward into the next few years.
I think every single platform is racing to this addressable media, and how do we get there? Has anyone got it right in South Africa? Tiny, so small. We're expecting out of home to be addressable. We expect digital to be addressable. The only element which is addressable when someone clicks on digital, to make it that personal and to get that data to be able to retarget them. But there's nothing stopping out of home doing the same and interlinking with the same type of tech. One of the case studies which I saw was an out of home saying, scan this for a recipe and take it into the digital realm, but also take it into retail media. So scan this recipe and automatically get a shoppable ad. So going in and having all your e-commerce automatically populating what you need to buy for that recipe, which is phenomenal. That is addressable. And it's immediate from an out-of-home site. So there's nothing stopping us taking the technology forward off a billboard or instantaneous sort of gratification. We've created the loyalty by helping them save time on what they needed to do to get there. Much like yourselves going onto YouTube, recording certain elements, but people see it first on out of home. So really looking at the attribution as to what out of home plays within the addressable media space. Everyone thinks, well, it's about your own ad to a particular person on out of home. That's not it. It's the interlink into the process on what addressable is and how you answer the consumer's needs. So absolutely, every single platform is driving there because people want to be heard and want to be seen. But don't forget about the brand love and don't forget about what brands mean to people. One of the crazes I saw in Dubai is this new fixed chocolate. I was like, sorry, a fixed chocolate? It very expensive for us from a South African perspective. But it's driven an absolute craze where kids in South Africa are trying to get their hands on this fixed chocolate. And how do they do it? A craze is a craze. A trend is a trend. A trend doesn't last as long as what it used to, but it still lasts. It's still a trend. And how do we take that trend into out of home?
It just made me think that at times we've caught up in specifically the out of home channel, and I know this podcast is about out of home, but focusing on what are our major problems and why can't we get it right? What needs to be done? What needs to be changed? And yes, there are so many wonderful things that the platform and the channel are doing. But when you mentioned that journey of almost through scanning something on your phone, the items end up immediately in your shopping basket, and the journey that the brand can actually tell for their customers in that way, it reminded me of, I think the first introduction of that was through QR codes being scanned, for example, in a pedestrian area for out of home. And the mechanic and the thinking has advanced with the technology, but it's such a simple idea. And I wonder if we've got too caught up in some of the details that we've lost the the threads that almost the attribution low-hanging fruit, it actually exists. You don't have to be a data scientist to come up with attribution modeling for out of home. You actually just have to be smart around how you're connecting what measurement pieces there are and what attribution pieces there are, and how can that link come together. So I've just had my own personal little aha moment there to say, well, actually, you know what, at times you want to overcomplicate things or do the big innovations in technology, but at the same time, are you missing a link that's maybe a lower hanging fruit? Which I think you've really summed that up beautifully.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I had a lot of aha moments in exactly the same space that you have. We're trying to run before we can actually crawl and walk, and we forget about the things that's already made a brand famous, and leveraging off that with the trends that face or are put in front of us by consumers. And innovation comes from that insight. And the platform on which you use to activate that insight is absolutely key. And I'm taking it back again because all brands are going into ROAS. They have to justify every single penny that they spend. And it's no different in television. You talk about GRPs, we're so fixated, but we're not fixated enough on the sales, on the ROAS, and how we measure that with the client. It doesn't have to be that absolute sales figure. It's the way you tell the story. We all in advertising, we should be storytellers, but we forget that we fixated, I need an absolute sales figure. No, the client can tell you, we saw a X percentage upliftment from this platform. If you've got your measurement correct and you understand exactly what you're measuring.
Celia, you've touched on it now, and I want to change gears slightly and chat about measurement in out-of-home specifically. It's a hot topic, it's a complex topic, and it's come up in every single episode that we've had. And depending on kind of if you're speaking to a media agency person, a client, or a media owner, the importance and the intricacies are different depending on where you're sitting. But I wanted to just get your opinion on where we're at currently in the market today. We've got some fundamental partners like the OMC that are using global best practice from a measurement perspective in market. We've got some other formats that are not being able to be measured using that system, like All Unite. The Prevantage team have come to market with that quite publicly. And I wanted to find out, from your perspective, what is your take on measurement in out-of-home? What are you hearing clients commenting about it in out-of-home? I'd just love to hear your feeling and kind of your conversations span media owners, both senior and junior, clients, both senior and junior. Your experience kind of crosses across a whole lot of different levels.
It does. And my nerd comes out when you talk about research. I put my nerd in my propeller head cap on because that's where my passion's always been, and measurement of such. But what I've learned, I would say, in the past year is measurement is always subjective. It confirms or understands an understanding of what's happening in the consumer lifestyle. Is it absolute? No. Statistics is not absolute. It's weighted. It's a weighted average. So there are always going to be numerous ways to measure something. But I think what is becoming very clear to me is, how do we measure the size of the audience? Because once you get that size of audience, you're able to stipulate, right, if I've got the size of the audience up front, what am I going to see once the campaign is run? How do I measure that? So we're taking it a step further. How you get to the size of the audience, you've got multiple ways to get there. But we need to focus on actuals now. So we talk about, after how many rating points did we get on television? How many impressions did we get from digital? How many leads did we get? Is a lead an absolute sale? Absolutely not. A consumer can drop off at any time. But if we're able to measure what was planned to what was actual, to what the sales are, it gives us a very, very different story. So what are we attributing a sale to? And it could be proportionately to out of home, proportionately to digital. All of them are playing a role in the consumer's actual purchase, the ROAS. And that's where I think we try and take the whole ROAS for a particular platform instead of thinking broadly as to the consumer journey, which we talk about as media agencies and as clients and as media owners all the time, but we don't talk about the end. And we fundamentally need to get that common currency to get to the end. Do some clients have it? Absolutely. Are there lots of them? Absolutely not, especially in South Africa. I think that's the golden egg at the moment, is to be able to justify your spend and contribution to sales and why you're spending that within a marketing environment. Measurement will always be there. It will form a fundamental of how we get to the end solution and the golden egg to prove that we've played a part in a purchase.
I've had another aha moment, actually. This is a great day for me, really. Is that there's this obsession around measurement, and how you've said it now, like I said, it just was an aha moment for me, is that the measurement happens while the planning of the campaign is happening against the best principles, the media principles. We plan the measurement according to the formats, but it's not to get caught up and lost in that detail, because it's only one piece of the media journey that you're going on. And as you said, if the golden egg is proving to clients that your advertising spend has worked, the measurement happened in the planning phase. What else has been looped during the campaign to understand how we're going to try and tick that box at the end of the journey? And I think you mentioning like ROAS is the thing. I think that is a huge game change and a shift in that, yes, you have to have all your fundamentals in place, but guaranteed there are people listening who are not even thinking about the ROAS at this point. They're just like, I've got to meet the media agency. I've got to get on the schedule. Or how am I going to get my client to agree to do a mold on this billboard? That's like the thought. You get stuck there without zooming out to see like, okay, well, what is the actual, how are you going to get this client to invest more money in their advertising or their media campaign? And it's through that journey that you've spoken through. So yeah, I'm really loving that.
And what we forget, and I think I see it a lot in some of the proposals that are sent to us, it's always based on short term. It's not based on long-term goals. So we are answering a brief that we're not thinking about the long term. How do I create longevity and not just instantaneous? So I can create innovation, but is that sustainable for the long term? No, it's going to create immediate impact. How do I downscale to ensure that the longevity is there? Innovation doesn't have to be always on 24/7. It's done that for impact, to create a consumer to look, and I've grabbed them. How do I maintain them now? So we look at campaign by campaign instead of thinking, great campaign burst, but what about the longevity? What about the always on? Can my board do that for you? And how do I sell that board to do that for you?
That makes me think about when we're talking about a board and using it long term and building that brand equity. It makes me think about something we've also spoken about recently, was a lot of out of home, and I think Celia touched on this at the beginning of the episode, is being used quite tactically, quite fast, particularly because of the digital out of home boom in the markets. But we're not, or maybe I'll pose this to you as a question, are you seeing out of home still being used for long-term brand building? Or is it has it shifted so much that a lot of clients are only looking at it for tactical, and those long-term, remember those, you would have like a long-term landmark site in one of the markets across Africa and you'd have it for like 2 to 5 years. You know, is that still happening, those long-term holdings, as much as they were? Or, you know, has everybody just been focusing, as you say, on like the short turnaround, immediate gratification, I guess, in a way? What are you seeing on your side?
I think it's a mixed bag of goodies that you pick out. Do you pick out real quality sometimes? Absolutely. Clients are thinking short and long term. There are some brands that are only thinking short term because they need the instant sales to prove. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was talking to a new brand in a new vertical I'd never ever touched on. And they turned around and said, well, my CEO doesn't think digital out of home works. And I went, okay, let's break this down. Let's have the debate on why you think that and what are the driving contributors. Do you understand, not yourself, not you are not the brand, do you understand how consumers are seeing that board? Me saying, well, I've got 2 or 3 seconds to get my message across. And I said, is that any different on a digital platform? People are scrolling at such a pace. In a car, you're captive and you've got an 8-second, not only a 2 or 3 second, scroll burst. So maybe what we're doing is we're not thinking about digital out of home as a non-30 second. Too many times I've seen people say, oh, we'll cut the TVC down and put it to 15 seconds on a billboard, forgetting it doesn't have sound, or they've got too many words on a visual, and they think because it's not static, it's digital, it's maybe got a different effect. It doesn't matter. We've got to concentrate on what is the message we're putting out there. How long are we going to captivate the consumer for and get them into that brand love cycle? For a brand to say, well, I don't think digital out of home is going to do it, I think is a total misconception of how consumers consume.
I think it's such a great point. And actually, in a way, I'm like, whoever the client was might have picked the wrong person to have thrown that out to, or the right person to actually be able to give a justification. Because I think that there are sometimes, each of us, I guess, have our own bias towards certain things. And I think that, your perception is that people are traveling on a highway too quickly to read the digital board between a changing clients. And, that's simply not the case. And I think that it's great that you were actually asked that question, that you were able to fight the case for digital out of home in that space. And like you say, compare it to scrolling on your phone. I would agree with you that people are arguably scrolling faster on their phone than they would be traveling past a billboard on a highway. I think it's really, really suitable, coming off the back end of the trip that you've just been on, is that out of home lends itself so beautifully to the activation space and the gamification space. And often I've seen a lot more global case studies of this than local executions in our market. But there are pedestrian environments in South Africa that you are able to engage on a one-on-one with consumers. Yes, we don't have necessarily digitized bus shelters around every corner, but there are so many different formats that are lending itself in that space. If you look at the forecourt space, for example, if you look at the airports, the Gautrain, and I wanted to just ask, what are your ideas, opinions, inspirations around this gamification of out-of-home for brands and for consumers?
It's absolutely up there on innovation and ready for the taking. Yes, we've got to look at it environment specific. We are not like Europe. We are not like Dubai, where it's safe in every environment to actually apply gamification. So we've got more of a captive audience, more talkability in using how we see that message and gamification over out of home. People want to be seen gaining. It's a new trend. Well, it's not really a new trend. It's been there, but it's growing dramatically. And the younger generation, it's part of what they do. They want to be seen. They want to be on TikTok. So how do we include it into the TikTok environment from an out-of-home perspective? The world is your oyster. I mean, I'm not going to give a few ideas away. I've got so many for particular clients on how we actually incorporate it. But you look at people who are going into and testing the gamification within South Africa. A few months ago, Candy Crush, yes, that's me. Sorry, when I'm a little bit bored, I get onto Candy Crush.
You're not alone, Seals, I promise you.
And I saw a brand in there. I was like, wow, they're testing the water. How do you take that onto or into an out-of-home activation idea? You know, my mind just keeps firing on all the different elements you can actually incorporate. It's phenomenal. Once again, some of the case studies, which you can actually Google. If you Google gamification and out of home, there's some brilliant case studies coming out. And you've just got to think about environment and where it would be relevant.
Hopefully gamification and, you know, the increase of engagement with our consumers through out of home will be a focus area as we move forward. I do think it's something that excites me. I know that every time we speak about it, I get, you know, as Celia, as you said, get all thrilled about it. And I think there's definitely more space to play as we move forward. I think as we started at the top of this episode, there is so much in the out-of-home space. It is so vast. It is so big. But also, there's been a lot of growth in the out-of-home space in the last year, and there's a lot more work to do as we move forward in the years to come. So I think we could have had this episode go on for another hour, 2 hours. You know, Celia, your passion for out-of-home comes through so clearly, and I love that we can have these conversations with you, open, honest, transparent conversations with you. And I'm sure we could have continued even longer. But I just wanted to say thank you for being with us for our first YouTube video episode. And thank you for coming back to mark our 1 year anniversary.
Thank you for having me. And I'm honored. And hopefully in a year's time, we're going to talk about the new trends that have come out of this and where we're going. We've actually taken that step and done something about it. But thank you to both of you for having me again. I'm truly honored.
Thanks so much, Seals. Lovely to have you on again.
Thanks for joining us today to go beyond the billboard. Subscribe to our podcast to ensure you don't miss out on our exciting content.
Join us again to go beyond the billboard.
1, 2.